Turn with me this morning, if you have a copy of God's Word with you, to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. If you don't have a Bible with you, reach into the pew in front of you and grab one that's been provided. I want to jump right into this morning to the original climate of the surrounding the parable that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at a very familiar parable, the parable that we call the prodigal son or the lost son. I want to take a look at it today. So in verses 1 and 2 of Luke chapter 15, where we find this parable, we find that Jesus is in a very familiar situation. Let's read those two verses 1 and 2 of Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So we look at this situation. We find that Jesus out teaching, doing what Jesus did when he was on the earth, and then apparently the wrong people are responding to him. Apparently he is giving his attention to the wrong people. You see, the scandalous thing that's going on here is that the Pharisees and the scribes, those people who think they're high and mighty, who think that they're right living, and think that they do everything right according to what God said, are looking at themselves and saying, why isn't he talking to us? We're the ones that a great prophet should be talking to. I mean, it seems that Jesus was at it again. A great man of God who did great things like heal the sick, make lame people walk, feed the multitudes, cause the blind man to see, calm the storms. And here he was, this great man, obviously a man of God, was talking to people that didn't deserve to hear his message. I mean, he was obviously a great teacher. He was a biblical scholar with a profound message. And here he was, the great, maybe some even people call him Elijah, maybe the greatest prophet of all, greatest Hebrew prophet of all time. But he was talking to people like sinners and tax collectors, and you can just feel the Pharisees and the scribes' arrogance as they say, "What does he think he's doing? And who do these people think they are? What kind of prophet, what kind of great man of God would come and preach to a bunch of misfits?" See, the people coming to Jesus, tax collectors and sinners, will have a representative in the story that we look at today in verses 11 through 32. We know him as the prodigal son. Follow along this morning as I read, beginning in verse 11, the account of the prodigal son, the character who will represent those tax collectors and sinners. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine rose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he rose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. He felt compassion, and he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they begin to celebrate. This story, I think, the first section of this story, when we talk about the lost son, it's a perfect illustration of one side of the gospel message. The younger son asks the unthinkable of his father. His desire is for what is coming to him. His desire is for his inheritance, for his well-being, for his financial freedom, if you will. He knows that by law, his father has got to divide his estate and give him, when he dies, leave him 1/3 of it. If there are two sons, which the story says there are two sons, Deuteronomy 21 says that the older son will receive a double portion of the inheritance. So the older son would receive 2/3, but this younger son is very happy with his father's 1/3 of it. But he wants it right now. He doesn't want to wait on it. He doesn't want his father to wait until his father's gone. He wants it right now. The inheritance is as good as his son, as good as his, except for this, and this makes it unthinkable. The father's still alive. And there's no provision in the law for the father to liquidate any part of his estate to give away before his death. By making this request, here's what the son is telling his father. I want your money, but I don't want you. I want what you have to be mine, but I don't want to do what is required for me to give it. I want it now. This kind of disrespect is addressed in that same law in Deuteronomy 21 as the law that says that he must divide, the father divides, tells him how to divide the property. According to Deuteronomy 21, this father has the right to disown his son at this point and to have him stoned. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because the father does what the son asks. He goes against the culture. He goes against the norm. And at the time the Pharisees are listening to this story, and they're listening to this story about this son who has disowned his father and disrespected him just for out of greed. And his father is really an object of public embarrassment at this time. And the Pharisees are thinking, yeah, he has really embarrassed. He's made a spectacle of his father. But then look what the father does. Something that is really inexplicable. So the son gathers his things, has his newfound freedom, and he goes and he wastes all of his money and everything that he has on inheritance, on what we would call prodigal living. The prodigal, we think it means that one who's gone astray, one who leaves, but prodigal really just means reckless or irresponsible. So he wastes it on irresponsible living. And I'm sure that he lived it up for a while. He had everything he wanted. He partied what he wanted. He didn't work. He did what the things that he wanted to do. Spend it on the things, on the pleasures that he wanted, but pretty soon he was broke. And since he had wandered into a distant land, and obviously by the context of the passage, where the land is one that produces pigs, obviously it was a Gentile land. And since it was Gentile land, he couldn't even, as a poor person, could not even depend on those who were compelled to give him something. I mean, had he done this in a Jewish land, if he was poor, the law required for the landowner and the wealthy to at least give some portion of what they had to the poor. That's how Ruth gathered her grain in the story of Ruth and Boaz as she had worked in his field. It was by law that she was able to do that. But in a Gentile proper land, where he went, where all the fun was, there was nothing, no guarantee of that. There was no possibility of him having someone help him out. And on top of that, there was a famine. Even if someone had a soft heart toward him, there still wasn't anything for him to have, for him to be given to him. It was really a difficult time. So he found himself in a pit of desperation. He found himself taking a job as a hired worker, which is worse than a slave. See, a slave, at least, even though they work for nothing, they're at least property of the owner. And the owner takes care of his property, provides food, provides shelter for him. But a hired worker had no such security. And when the time in the country when it was so difficult and times were so desperate, his pittance of a wage that he made as a day worker couldn't buy him food. Maybe even he would work a day and he'd go to the employer and he would say, I don't have anything to pay you with today. So he found himself starving, struggling, feeding pigs, and wanting to eat the same things that the pigs had eaten. The fact that he was feeding pigs and desiring to eat with them was an obvious allusion to the depths to which he had sunk. He'd broken the command to honor his father and mother. He had abandoned his family. He had now he found himself worse off than even the unclean animals. So as the Pharisees hear this story, and they hear this about this young man, this disrespectful man, this wasteful, prodigal individual, they just have to think, what a disgrace he has become. Our story tells us, Jesus says that he came to himself. Literally, it means that he came to his senses. And now, don't over-spiritualize this. This wasn't a situation where he said, oh, I need forgiveness. It wasn't a situation where he said, oh, look at all the wrong I'm doing. This was a situation where he said, he felt, I'm hungry. This is a situation where he thought, hey, my father's servants eat better than I do. This is kind of an aha moment for him. See, God, we've all thought this at times. I'm sure every one of us has been in a situation where we thought, how stupid can I be? What a dumb move. How can I ever dip this, do this? And when it comes to lifestyle, sometimes we're merely blinded by the situation that we're in. We're either hopeless, or whether we're hopeless or whether we're living up. Those situations can blind us. We can't see the big picture. And I'm not sure why it takes some longer to come to our senses. I don't know why it takes some others as long as it took me to come to my senses and realize that there was a better place for me to be than to be out doing the things that I did. From my personal experience, there was just this great wall of density. I can't even say anything else. Now, Rebecca will testify that I'm still kind of a dense person at times, I think. Sometimes it takes some things to get through to me. It takes some time. But there was a great wall of density in my life that I could not see through. And finally, finally I came through that time, coming to my senses and thought logically. Now logical thinking just flies away from us at times. And we get deeper and deeper in holes that we've dug for ourselves. But when we come to our senses, there is an ability that God gives us to put two and two together and to come up with an answer. And I believe that's where we find our son today. He's logically thought. Now I've got an answer. And here's what he thinks. I'm here wanting to eat what I'm feeding pigs. My father's servants have plenty. I can go and be my father's servant. There's never a thought in his head that he can go back and be his father's son again. He is so hopelessly lost and hopelessly gone that he would never expect his father to accept him. But maybe since he's my father, he's still my father, he will not completely disown me and let me work for him. Let me slave for him. Let me earn my own living. Let me be provided for. But the answer that he got was not the one he expected. See, he had added these things up, but he had not gotten the right answer. This is what happened. He's still apprehensive as he goes home. He practices his plea to his father. He knew that his father would never accept him again. He would not ask to live in the house. He wouldn't even ask to live in the slave quarters. He would simply ask to work as he had been doing as a hired worker. He knew that his father's day laborers had plenty to eat. And his dad, surely he would let him do this. And that's all he would expect out of his father. But he wouldn't be surprised if his father had him stoned. You see, it was all within his father's rights to do so. But that's not what he found when he got home. His father would have no part of him working his way back into the family. He would have no part of him being an employee. He ran out and he grabbed him and he embraced him and he kissed him. And he had a ring put on his finger, the sign of a family. He had a coat, the best coat, it says. The best coat in the house would have been the father's coat. I have your own coat put on me. Put my own coat on him. Put the best coat on him, clothe him. He kissed his dirty neck, covered his filthy, pig-smelling body with his coat. And the compassion of his father is so prevalent. There's never a point when this son had not been his son. And this is clear by the father's refusal to hear the son's request to work for him. The son had rejected, humiliated, and completely taken advantage of the father. And according to the law, he deserved death, but he received a welcoming far beyond the expectations of himself, and definitely far beyond the expectations of the Pharisees who were in the audience. This part of the story is a picture of God's tender love and mercy. It's indicative of the way that God pursues and welcomes the sinner, no matter what he's done, no matter where he's been, no matter what he may look like. And that's the God we serve. That's the God we're here to worship today. Not just one who will stand at his gate and wait on us to come to him and grovel and beg in front of him to be a part of his family. We serve and worship a God who actively pursues people with his Holy Spirit. He pursues us in our sin and invites us into his house. And when we come to him, he welcomes us with open arms and lavishes us with more love than we could even imagine. And that is the awesome part of this story when it comes to looking at God's grace and his mercy. And those tax collectors and sinners that Jesus was talking to, they were hearing this and hearing that there's a way for me to come to Christ. There's a way for me to be forgiven. There's a way for me, a low-life scum, to be worth something. And we can't overlook that. Can't overlook that at all. Because that's where all of us potentially could be. Or have been in our lives. But the Pharisees could not have been happy with the outcome of this, because there's a character in the story that represents the Pharisees as well. And this character is the older brother. Now the older brother was indignant. How could my father do this? How could my father let him back in to our family? How could he throw such a party? Let's take a look at this side of the story. Beginning in verse 25. Now the elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. You see, the older brother, what he wanted was nothing different than the younger brother wanted. He wanted his father's wealth too. But he would not go into the party because he was furious that his father would welcome home the younger brother with such extravagance. He determined that he had gone about gaining in his inheritance the right way. But had he really done things the right way? Sure, he stayed at home. Sure, he worked. Sure, he wasn't a disobedient or prodigal son, reckless. But after rejecting his father's plea to come and celebrate, he boasted of his works. The word here that's translated, I have served you, literally means, I have been your slave. You see what the older brother had done? What he was putting confidence in was his own efforts. He hadn't worked for his father because he had a great relationship with his father. He hadn't done these things because his father, because he wanted to. He had begrudgingly worked to earn his part of the inheritance. He had an attitude toward his father that was no different than the son. I want your money. I don't want you. But I'll stay here and I'll be unhappy and work for it. I'm not going to do like that son of yours, refuses to call him brother. Look what I've done. Look what I've done. And look what you've given me. See, he's missed out on the joy of a relationship that has been available to him the whole time. The father says, look, you've always been with me, and everything I have is yours. It's right under your nose. Everything I'm giving to your son, to your brother tonight, is yours. It's been right here, and you've been too hard-headed and too stubborn to look and find it. You've missed the forest for the trees. You can't see it because of your self-righteousness. You think that what you do, what you have done, has earned your way into my family. But it's not the case. Just like I'm your brother's father, I'm always your father too. And this is all available to you. The elder brother is so wrapped up in his own efforts that he missed out on the celebration that had been under his nose the entire life. In fact, his attitude had been the same very, very Very same as the other sons. All he wanted was the inheritance, but not his father. His anger toward his father parallels the astonishment of the Pharisees. See, they saw Jesus spending time with the younger brother. They saw Jesus in this situation, seemingly pouring himself out more to them, to the tax collectors and sinners, than to them. Now Jesus told the story after telling two others. In the first two parables, he told the parable of the lost sheep, in which there were 100 sheep. Stinking, dumb sheep. And I'm quite certain that when he said that there was one sheep lost, and that the shepherd went to look for it, I'm pretty sure that the Pharisees said, yeah, you need to go look for that sheep. You can't do without that sheep. And that then when the woman lost one of her 10 coins, I'm pretty certain that the Pharisees were thinking, yeah, of course you're going to look for it. Of course you're going to put every effort out to sweep everywhere just to find that coin. But when it came down to 1 out of 2 human being, living, breathing people who had value to God, the Pharisees said, I wouldn't waste a second looking for him. Stone him. Get rid of him. He does not need to be breathing my air. And folks, when we look at people and consider them useless, scum, sinners, worthless, we're saying the same thing to them. We're being older brothers. And we cannot be older brothers. We're being the same as the Pharisees, who would look down and say, God is for me, not for him. It's all over our world. And you don't have to leave Jonesboro. In fact, in the South, in the church culture, in the Bible Belt, it's probably why you have shrinking attendances in smaller churches who are about to die off because the world doesn't feel that the church values them. We've all been big brothers. I can't say that I'm not, at times, still in that boat. The older brother had a sense of entitlement to the things of his father, and now he was going to have to share it with his brother all over again. You see, now that his father had welcomed the younger son into the family, when he died, he was going to split that inheritance again, 2/3 and 1/3. The law said he had to, and he was going to do that. You see, the Pharisees had the same sense of entitlement. If Jesus was a man sent from God, surely he would spend time with them, right? They grew jealous of Jesus. They denied Jesus' authority because he came to save the people they didn't think were worth saving. And I fear we have the same attitude at times in our church pews. Maybe not so much in here today with the folks that we have. But I fear that Christianity is looked upon the same way that most of us are looking at those Pharisees today. All of us have the propensity to look down our noses at people we don't deem worthy. We've catered to the self-righteous. We've neglected the broken. We put more stock in those who contribute than we do the one who may be humbly seeking some sense of belonging. See, that's all the younger brother wanted. He wanted some sense of belonging in the father's estate so that he'd be taken care of. He was willing to work at it. He was willing to be a day laborer for his father. And there are people all over our world, all over our nation, who just want a little bit of belonging. But we reject them and push them aside. Perhaps we should invite them both afresh to the party. Both the Pharisees and the sinners. You see, Jesus obviously was inviting the sinners. They're the ones who he portrays as God pursuing and lavishing with grace and mercy. But you notice there's a point in this story where it ends, and we don't know if the older son ever went into the story, into the party. It doesn't tell us. And I think this is intentional. I think Jesus left that open because the Father invited him in. See, I think we have a parable here with two lost sons. It's obvious for us to look at the prodigal and say, he's lost. He needs Jesus bad. But can we look at the Pharisees and the scribes and think the same thing about them? See, they've worked for their salvation. They've worked for their status with God. And I know we've got people in our churches who one day will stand before God and they will say, if God asked them, why should I let you into heaven? They would say, because I've done this and I've done this. I've been to church. I sing in the choir. My dad was a deacon. List. Or maybe I was a deacon. I'm worthy, right? In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus said, many of you will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, didn't I do great things in your name? And Jesus will look at them and say, away from me, I do not know you. You're a worker of lawlessness. See, it can never be about what we've done to get us to earn our favor with God or to receive the salvation that he has offered to us. See, Jesus, I believe, invited both of them to the party. In the celebrations in this series of parables, all three of them end in a celebration. I believe they're representative of a life of salvation in Christ. They're a picture of the ultimate celebration, the marriage supper of the Lamb in Revelation 21. Jesus began with the story of the one sheep out of 100. And when the lost sheep was found, there was a party, a celebration. The next parable was about a woman who had lost one of 10 coins. When she found it, she called her neighbors to rejoice with her. And it says that just as that happens, when one comes to Christ, the angels in heaven rejoice over them being found. Here in our passage today, a father had two lost sons, one who was lost in his pursuit of sensual pleasure, the other lost in his own self-centered efforts. One was found and came into the party as the guest of honor. The other, it appears, remains lost outside the party, indignant that his father had lavished so much mercy and grace on the younger brother. Pharisees would turn Jesus over to the Romans to be crucified. And Jesus knew this, yet he offered them an invitation in. He was offering the same mercy, the same grace, the same lavishness to the Pharisees that he was to the tax collectors, to the sinners. What a gospel. What a gospel that offers this to everybody. We are like sheep who gone astray, and many of us have sold ourselves into the slavery of sensuality. But maybe some of us have sold ourselves into the slavery of self-righteousness. Truth be told, we have done both at one time or another. Truth be told, we've been younger brothers and older brothers in our lives. But it doesn't really matter. The truth remains that salvation, inheritance, and abundant life of freedom of Christ is available to all who call upon the name of the Lord. So if you're here this morning and you're astray like the younger brother, and I don't care what you've done, I don't care where you've been, place your life in the hands of the Heavenly Father. He alone can show the mercy that would give you a new life. If you're like the older brother and you work diligently and begrudgingly to earn the Father's favor, stop. And lay your life in the hands of the gospel. Lay your life in the hands of Christ.